Once vaccines became available, many of us thought that COVID's end was near. Yet, with the emergence of variants, we are still battling the pandemic. This season, I continue to speak with community leaders, teachers, clinicians, and many more across the globe to connect with communities and hear their stories. This season, I bring you 16 and Vaccine. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of 16 and Vaccine. Today, we are joined by Dr. Jeannine Jannot. She is a local psychologist and has also published the book titled The Disintegrating Student. Dr. Jannot, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can you please give us some details about your professional background?
So my background is kind of a mix of education and psychology. I have a master's in school psychology and a PhD in child and developmental psychology. And I've worked in preschools, I've taught college, I've done all kinds of works with children from, kind of babies all the way through young adulthood. And in doing that, especially when I got to the point where I was teaching college students, that's when I got this interest in what was happening with our students. Because at the time I had kids in elementary, middle school, and high school myself and teaching college. And that's when I noticed so many students struggling and decided to offer academic coaching to them to help give them some skills and strategies. And that's what led me to write the book, The Disintegrating Student, because I realized there was something going on that needed to be addressed.
Yeah, you just mentioned it a little earlier, but this just goes right into my next question. So you published a book called The Disintegrating Student, as you mentioned. Can you just give our viewers a little bit more of an overview?
Yes, so the book is written to help parents and students and educators kind of understand the very complex problem of why students are disintegrating, really kind of falling apart. And typically what I saw in my coaching, which surprised me, were really high achieving kids, even gifted kids, who all of a sudden, 8th grade, 10th grade, even into college, they just hit a rigor tipping point, a point where there was so much rigor that just being the smart kid who could get it done quickly without really studying just wasn't cutting it anymore. So they couldn't compensate by just being bright. And a whole lot of things happen when that rigor tipping point gets hit. Conflict within the family. It really impacts self-esteem. So that's what the book is all about.
Yeah. So what are some of the mental health concerns that you were seeing before the pandemic?
So before the pandemic, anxiety was probably the most common thing that was, because again, these students were very stressed out, and again, self-confidence was down, motivation was down, conflict with their parents. So anxiety, sometimes depression to the levels of being, clinical depression. Those were the biggest things. I saw a lot of social anxiety too in like the middle school age group, probably more so than any other age group.
That's fascinating. So unfortunately, there's still a lot of confusion and sometimes even shame in mental health. For kids, we sometimes don't even know that what we're experiencing falls into the category of mental health, and that there's also help, which is what you do. Can you just speak a little bit to this?
Yeah, I think there can be shame associated with it, or the idea that it's just me and nobody else is struggling in this way. And I think one of the best things I could say to students is, if it feels distressful to you, if there's a lot of personal distress going on, if it seems to be interfering with doing the things you really want to do. So, if you're so anxious about school that you're having trouble leaving the house or getting out of bed, that's not quote unquote normal. That's kind of outside the realm. And that's a time where we really need to reach out to a trusted adult, whether it be a parent, a relative, a neighbor, a teacher, a physician, really anyone, to just say, this is happening, and start to look for somebody to kind of help connect you with some resources.
Yeah, you could be getting, good grades at school, but if you're just constantly studying and, there's not a lot of social interaction that you're having, it could, you're not happy. You need to talk to, someone like you. that can really help. So you've played a critical role in helping high school students cope with mental health issues during the pandemic. What were some of the pandemic related issues that you were seeing?
Well, it was everything pre-pandemic on steroids. So anxiety got a lot worse, depression got a lot worse. I saw a lot more eating disorders, substance use disorder. Um, so ways that, basically ways to kind of moderate all the stress that the pandemic brought upon students. So there was low control, high uncertainty, which just caused higher anxiety. And so everything just got worse.
So psychologists have an important job, and sometimes being face to face is necessary. With the pandemic, how did that affect your job, especially working with students who like to be face to face?
Yeah, I had to figure out virtual just like students did. So I
Yeah.
certainly kind of understood why that was problematic for them. So, it was sort of the only option for a while there that was available. So that was important because I think we needed that lifeline to stay connected with people. So it did help me in my coaching be able to still keep tabs on students, help give them a space to talk through why virtual was hard for them, come up with some strategies to and to reevaluate their expectations, because I think a lot of students had trouble shifting from their very high expectations of themselves. And then the pandemic comes along and really all the expectations changed, but students didn't really sometimes feel like they had permission to do it differently or perform at a different level. So that was a lot of what I did virtually with students.
Yeah, so you're just talking a little bit about it, but like when the pandemic first hit, online was the only option. And so now, after working virtually for around 2 years, has working virtually had any positive effects for you as a psychologist?
I actually ended up really liking it. For me, it gives me a lot of flexibility. I can see students from a greater distance, even out of state. So professionally, that's been great. There is, it also gives some flexibility to students who have jam-packed schedules and they don't have to commute to a place, that takes that commute out. But you miss out on a lot.
Yeah,
The body
social interaction.
language and all that nonverbal stuff that's a little harder to pick up on video, and heaven forbid you have technical difficulties, that degrades the experience. Although I will say in person, there was a time we were doing in person with masks, and to be honest with you, I preferred virtual no masks
Yeah,
to in person with masks because of all the nonverbal and all the body language. This
yeah.
is really very helpful.
It's
Yeah.
hard to communicate when you have a mask on. So due to the pandemic, students have to shift from being in person to being online, and there was no social interaction. So because of this, many kids lost their social skills, which is an important life skill. As a psychologist that works with students, can you just speak to that?
So this, I think, is sort of the most underappreciated problem that we have faced this year in education. And that is came into this school year thinking, yay, it's going to be normal. We're not going to be going off on virtual, and, some schools were lifting mask mandates or making it optional. So there was a lot more hopefulness going into this year. And what ended up happening was, because there was all this concern about recovery and catching students up, schools went ahead and just like, okay, we're back to normal. And they kind of doubled down on, not, they did the appropriate thing in the years before, where they kind of loosened, the reins a bit and let students have some room and gave a lot of flexibility. They didn't do that this year. And what we didn't factor in was how messed up developmentally the pandemic had left students. So for example, the trajectory, when you're in that, formative time of development, brain development, physical development, social development, all those things are occurring in a pretty, smooth manner. I mean, it just typically flows, and it got all messed up. And so we brought our kids in. So juniors this year teachers are describing more like freshmen,
Yeah.
because developmentally they're kind of stuck back where they were before things kind of got all messed up.
Yeah, I was a freshman when the pandemic first hit, and then returning back as a junior, it was really weird because I just basically skipped the whole 10th grade,
Hmm.
because I did it virtually last year. So for any viewers that are tuning in, who are themselves or may know someone who is struggling with various mental health issues brought on by the pandemic, what are some helpful steps that they could take right now?
Yeah, so again, I think, reaching out to a close friend or a trusted adult is probably the first step. And just trying to, there's so much information available out there. I think a lot of students know some of the things that would be helpful to them, like
Yeah.
maybe being off their screens more, or curating their social presence differently, getting more sleep, eating better, drinking more water. Kind of there's some really simple things that we can do to make ourselves feel better. But again, if it's a significant concern and it's impacting kind of the normal way you go about your activities, then certainly seeking out some professional help would be the best route to take.
Yeah, definitely. I think talking to someone definitely helps, and just letting other people know how you're feeling, so that they can help, and if need be, contact a professional like you. So in my last season, I would ask this question regularly in my interviews, and I think it's most fitting in this interview. And it's about hope. As it's been 2 years since the pandemic first began, I think it's really easy to lose hope. What is a message of hope that you can offer to our students or our viewers?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot to be hopeful about. I mean, this has been an unprecedented challenge that we have all gone through. And young people in particular don't have a lot of life history to kind of give them a foundation of how to do this. So I feel like the younger generations are building a lot of skill around coping, around resilience. And I feel like this whole experience is going to inoculate them to do even greater things going forward, because you've experienced something a lot of people haven't experienced until they're, in their 40s, 50s, 60s, or maybe even older. So I think that's something to be hopeful for. I mean, and look at you. Would you have been doing this if the pandemic
No,
hadn't happened?
exactly.
And I
No.
see that a lot. I see a lot of opportunities taken that might not have been taken otherwise. So I think that's very cool.
Yeah, I think the pandemic has definitely, it's brought so many different new things. It's definitely had some positive effects and negative effects as well, obviously. But with that being said, Dr. Jannot, I really appreciate you, for coming on and sharing your story.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.